Hey, welcome to Playing for Keeps, the show where we take a deep dive into emotional intelligence, sex, love, adult attachment theory, mental health, therapy, and everything in between that creates great relationships. Your host, DJ, is a certified life coach and emotional intelligence practitioner. She's here to be of service to all the listeners interested in love and relationship. Now, here's your host, DJ.
Hey everybody, it's your girl DJ with Playing for Keeps podcast, and today I have a special guest. Her name is Molly Davis. She is a psychotherapist, a mom to a young adult and a teenager. She is a partner, dreamer, and dishwasher. She owns and operates Wild Goose Counseling, a thriving little therapy practice in Soldotna, Alaska. She also teaches counseling graduate students as a part-time adjunct. Today, she is here to speak about boundaries in relationships, understanding what they are, how they help, how they flex and grow with our needs, how to set them, how to respond when they are crossed, the impact of grandiosity and shame in our boundary setting choices, and how to respect the boundaries of others. Hey, Molly, how are you today?
Hey, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on. So I'm a Facebook junkie, and I saw a few of your posts, and I was like, oh my gosh, she would be perfect to come on my podcast.
Thank you.
So I was like, let me just message her and just see if she would respond. So I am grateful that you decided to come on board and just grace us with your advice and expertise. So if you don't mind, why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about you? Why did you decide to be a psychotherapist?
Since I was a little kid, probably like most people who go into this kind of work, whether it's therapist, coaching, whatever, I just find humans fascinating, love them. My earliest childhood, I was reading all sorts of books about just humans and their lives and what it means to be a human. And so when I discovered psychology was actually a field, I couldn't believe it. It was so exciting to figure out, what? You could study this? I didn't know that you could make a living off of it. That was a happy surprise later. Like, oh, private practice is pretty cool. But it's just, even on really long days, I usually leave the office just feeling so lucky to get to do what I do with my fellow humans.
I agree. It's definitely a blessing to be able to work with people and then to help them on their journeys and their paths, and help them grow into what they want to be. So yeah, that you have a very, very rewarding career.
Yes.
So as far as boundary setting, could you tell us a little bit of why, maybe starting from childhood, on why people have issues with setting boundaries?
Well, I think that the tricky thing with boundaries in our interpersonal relationships is that they're, for the most part, invisible. And that's what makes it so tricky to know that if they're there, how you get them there. I think a lot of times we see in nature or in the outside external physical world, boundaries are very clear. Somebody puts a fence up, puts up a no trespassing sign, boom, that's a boundary. That's all a boundary is. It's kind of a delineation of where something stops and where another thing begins. You know, the river has an automatic boundary. This is the river, you can feel it, it's water. This is the bank, you can feel it, it's dirt. If you cross the boundary, you will know. You will be really wet. But so with our human relationships, it's so much trickier because a lot of these things are emotions, values, thoughts. We know that our bodies are very specific boundaries, for example, but we have a hard time even respecting that. You know, that we do with our physical violence, we'll violate other people's very physical boundaries.
Right.
By not respecting their body or using our body to hurt their body. And so if we struggle even just with the physical bodily boundaries, imagine how much trickier it is to figure out what are the boundaries when it comes to how I feel versus how you feel. Am I allowed to feel what I feel? What if I don't like how you feel? Am I allowed to change that? As if I could. But that doesn't stop us from trying.
Right.
And
it doesn't stop
in our relationships. Yeah, in our relationships, it's really tricky to know how do I get what I want and need while respecting what you want and need? What is within my rights and responsibilities and what isn't? And I think even, you probably experienced this as well. Being a therapist and not burning out requires having really good boundaries. And it's a sense because you jump into another person's world. You're invited into another person's deep, personal, internal world. But if you don't know that that's not your life, you'll carry those problems out the door and into your everyday life.
Right. And I think that's
so part of being a good. Oh, please go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. I was that's definitely a problem within relationships too, like how they carry on other people's necessary burdens and how would one set a boundary within that, especially if they're in a relationship with someone and in society it looks like, well, you're supposed to be open like no matter what, but in reality, as in order to protect our energy and ourselves, we have to set boundaries for sanity. So how does one set those boundaries and set them in a healthy way and still maintain that relationship or that partnership as even a psychotherapist?
Boundaries are, if I was going to describe what a boundary is, it is basically where I start and where I stop.
Okay.
If I know where I start and where I stop, it is very easy for me then to decide how I'm going to walk, how I'm going to behave, what is my business, what isn't my business. So understanding, there's a statement I heard, I used to work in the rehab world a bit, and so became really familiar with a lot of AA and NA, and there's this great saying in the NA rooms, it's my business, your business, or God's business. And I thought, damn, that's a really cool boundary statement, whether, depending on what somebody believes religiously, being, might be the universe's business or however one wants to say that. But I understand, so working as a therapist, my job is to come alongside somebody else in their life, in their journey, in their adventures, in their struggles, in their pain. My job is not to take those on. So when someone comes in, for example, from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, that time alone, provides me with a great boundary space. From 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, when someone comes in for their session, I am there with them. We're delving wherever they're comfortable going. I am their sidekick. My heart is open with compassion. But when they leave at 11 o'clock, I understand they are going to their one and only life. This is their life to walk through. It is not mine to continue to carry. I was invited in for this hour. For this hour, they're getting my 100%. After that hour is over, they are responsible for their life, and I am responsible for mine. And that way, I can be all there, but I don't get weighed down with the burdens that they have. I get to work on the burdens I have.
Right.
So in the same way, in a committed relationship, or even a casual relationship, a casual dating relationship, I decide how much I want to be involved or how little, but all I have to do is remember that's not my life. That's their life. They're responsible to live their life. They're responsible to figure out what to do with their burdens. I get to decide how much I do or don't want to help, depending on how much they're inviting that. Can really care about the fact of what happened when they were 2 years old, but that's also not my burden to bear, that's theirs.
Got you. Now, let me ask you this. So I know in your profession, you probably come across people with codependency issues, or people who they overextend themselves, and they know that they're overextending themselves and they can't compartmentalize like you just did, your burdens are your burdens. Like they just have issues with that. How do you work with someone who has a thought process like that?
I sure see that a lot. I'm sure you probably do too. I think it's a really common thing for us. Again, since we're not taught these things it's so rare that we're taught these things as children. Your concept of boundaries generally is something you kind of pick up from how the people around you model it. And so, especially, if for people who are raised almost having to parent their parents, maybe there's some trauma, neglect stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so for children who had to sort of be the most mature one in the family, a lot of times they'll struggle with codependency. Sometimes it's just simply something we're taught culturally. Like there's a lot of family homes where the woman is supposed to do all the things and the guys don't. And so, you grow up like that, you're sort of socialized into that, and sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes some of us have a whole lot of pain that we carry. We don't really know what to do with it, and it feels really nice to help solve other people's problems, and then we can avoid our own. There's a lot of really, good reasons why we end up becoming codependent as adults. They're just various coping strategies, but they unfortunately really mess with our adult relationships. So codependency at its core is simply not knowing where I start and stop. I'm codependent on you. That means I don't know that it's okay to be me. I don't know that I can just rest within myself, that I'm enough, that I have worth. So I'm finding, in one form or another, I'm finding my worth or my meaning or my sense of self outside of me. I'm attaching it to something else. So codependency at its core is just a sense of not knowing who I am. And if I don't know who I am, how in the world can I set boundaries?
That's right.
And I think that's really nice to know sometimes. It's a little heavy, but it's also a little reassuring. Like if you're a person who struggles with boundary setting, well, duh. If you don't have a good, solid sense of self, how can you know what boundaries to set? You don't know what you want, what you need, what you're feeling. And until you learn those things, until you find yourself, you won't be able to set boundaries very well. And so it kind of gives you, this is where it's slightly comforting. It gives you I need to do that.
Right.
Instead of trying to struggle over and over to set boundaries, I can go, okay, I need to find somebody who can help me find me. Then the boundary setting can come a whole heck of a lot easier.
That's true, because like you just said, a lot of people don't know. I know I still suffer from codependency type issues. That's something, because I know me, out of all of my brothers and sisters, I was the most mature, and I took care of a lot of things when my mother wasn't around. And then also with me, it was easier for me to bury my own issues in other people's problems. I didn't have to focus on the fact that I didn't know myself, or I didn't know where I was going, and I was trying to figure myself out. And it was just easier to help people figure out their stuff, and it seemed like they were in way deeper shit than I was in. So it just seemed easier. So I definitely can relate to what you are saying. And with me, just trying to grow into a better person and be more self-aware of these things. So I can be there more for myself than other people, because people tend to take advantage of people too who have issues with setting who are codependent. So that's something else I went through for years before I finally let me do some research.
And this is why, me too. I think almost all of us in this helping profession field, many of us come from these places. Like, I like to help.
Right.
I'm good at that. And then we discover, that's actually a bit of a problem.
Right. And it's like, let me figure out how to help in other ways. Kind of like, I know why I started this podcast and the different ventures that I'm trying to do. I'm pouring more into that, and I'm also finding myself, and it's helping me with, so it's,
I love that. That's cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of my journey. And a little bit of my journey. If
really
you listen
cool.
to other podcasts, you'll hear some of the craziness that I've been through.
That is so cool. I think that is well, what you said is so good, because that's how we find our way.
Right.
There's no book or workbook, and not putting any of them down. There's some great ones out there. They all kind of help. They're all like guideposts that help, like, oh, keep going north. But there's no like easy, like, now I get boundaries. I'm just going to start setting them down just right. No, it is an ever evolving, unfolding process. And as soon as you really get some good ones in a situation, just watch. Life will happen. You'll change. The situation will change, and you'll need to flex them. So they don't. Good boundaries are kind of almost like a skin. It moves. It grows. It shapes. It adjusts to the situation. It's a living thing. But when we first start practicing boundaries, I don't know about you, but when I first started learning that I could actually say no, like even though I could do something, that didn't mean I had to do it. I could actually say no. Oh my gosh, my boundaries at first were like really harsh. It took so much courage to get the word no out. I'd be like, no, and like, way overdo it, because it was so hard to get over that programming that's like, you're the helper. You're supposed to do the things. You have the ability to do it, so therefore you must do it.
Right. And I think mine is similar to yours, but I'd be really harsh. I'd be super harsh. It'd be more than a no, because I already feel used. So I'm cursing the person out, just being honest. But then the next day I'm like, okay, I'll help you, because I'll feel bad. And then it's like, okay, I got to grow out of this. Like you said, even though you have the means to do it, you don't have to do it. Kind of like the scenario that you just used. I like, is your problem, what was it? Your problem is, my problems, your problems, and God. You said something like that. What was it? The statement? I think I'm going to start using that even to help me.
Yeah, that. Yes. Is it my problem? Is it your problem? Or is it God's problem?
Yeah,
that concept is like the ultimate boundary statement for especially when someone is just beginning. Like, okay, wait, who is responsible for this problem?
Right.
That is such a powerful question.
It is.
Now, you and I too, we kind of might be more of givers, but some people tend, the way they grow up for various reasons, they lean more towards being takers.
Right.
Not on purpose. They don't even know. It's just how it works. I mean, maybe a parent just always gave. And so that personality just kind of adjusted to take. Or sometimes it's a trauma response. It's, there are some people who grow up, so they grow up with a lot of trauma, but their personality system and their genetics kind of sends them more into the fight response of fight or flight. And so they just take, like, I'm going to get you before you get me. I'm going to get everything I can out of this relationship. I'm going to make sure I get my needs met.
Right.
So they learned to survive that way.
And I was just about to say that some people, they act on survival mode. So, and I know I've run into a lot of people like that. And I know a lot of people will get on me. Well, they used to get on me in the past because I was still always so compassionate for these people, but I would always look at their upbringing and where they came from. And that's probably why they're the way that they are. But at the same time, I was still pacifying the fact that, you can't be a taker all the time. So how do you help a person change without helping them? How do you help a person change without putting your energy so much into it and helping them change?
Yes.
Yeah.
Such a good question, because you can see how, like, okay, so some people err over on the giving side, over giving, and they have to learn how to actually be okay with themselves, find themselves, respect themselves. Other people lean more towards the taking side. And I love how you notice too, we can actually see that quite compassionately. There's usually very good reasons why we become the way that we become, but it's still a really destructive behavior.
Right.
And it really sucks a lot of givers in. So if you don't, I love how you said, if you don't know where you start and stop and you're a giver, and you get with a taker who doesn't know where they start and stop, guess how that's going to look? They're going to be putting a straw in you and sucking your soul dry.
Right.
And they might not even know they did it. It's just the way they're surviving. Two people in that kind of survival mode can make for a really toxic relationship. So the important thing to do if somebody notices that they kind of lean towards the taking side is the same exact thing. It is, wait a minute, is this my business? Is this their business? Is this somebody else's business? They too have to learn where they start and where they stop.
Right.
But their focus is going to be slightly different. It's going to be on, am I treating this person with respect? So for the codependent style, we're asking more, am I treating myself with respect? Oh, I get to say no. Oh, I don't have to do that. Well, the person who leans more towards a taking style has to say, am I treating Joe with respect? Am I intruding on his space? Does he have the right to tell me no? Yes, he does. So I can't be mad about it. Those kinds of things.
Right.
And that's a tough one. That takes a lot of soul searching to ask those kind of questions.
It does take a lot of soul searching, though. The next question was, do you run into clients who are on the taker side that come to you and try to work on these things? Do you actually run across clients like that at all? I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, it's not as common. I feel like when you overgive or overextend yourself, you're way more likely to get yourself into therapy.
Right.
Because it hurts really bad.
It does.
After a while, you just run out of juice. Now, if you're overtaking, it's pretty great. You're causing a lot of pain, but you don't know it. You're not feeling most of it.
Right.
So it's a tougher one to find out. It is hurting you, but it sure doesn't feel like it. So that's kind of a more grandiose position. I like Terry Real kind of calls it grandiose, which is nice. Sometimes I think we over narcissist label people, and it's not. Very few people are actually true narcissists. It's just that a lot of us sometimes just lean towards the more grandiose, like I take and you give.
I like that
version of being in a relationship.
I like that saying because I know I can talk to a lot of people about, oh, he's a narcissistic. I'm like, I don't think it's that deep. You know what I'm saying? I just like what you just said. Yeah. Like, I have a question for you real quick before you. So when someone comes to see you that's on that taker side, like usually what is the reason? Like, does the giver just stop giving? Do they just totally just hit rock bottom? Like, what brings these people to therapy?
That is such a great question. It's really important for the givers to listen to this answer too. It is usually because the giver stopped giving. It's usually that the giver starts setting boundaries. The giver starts kind of figuring out that this isn't working for them and learning how to say no. And that finally creates some pain for the taker. And if the taker really wants to keep that marriage or keep that relationship or that relationship with the kid or whatever, then they, not always, but then they're going to be willing to kind of ask some tough questions. And I have worked with just some gorgeous people, just wonderful humans who have had, they might look like they have some diagnostic label, ooh, bad guy or whatever, and a lot of times they actually look pretty tough too, but they're just a sweet little scared 2-year-old guy. Yeah. Or just a polished looking woman, but who actually she never knew if there was going to be food in the cupboard day to day for her entire childhood, and they just developed this style for the same reasons we all developed kind of some of our more dysfunctional style. They were good coping skills back when they were needed. Right. We just never grew out of them. Takers are just survivors. That's what they are. They're survivors. They can make it. It's just that the war is over. Like, and their personality system doesn't know it yet. Right.
And they just subconsciously, like you say, it's a subconscious thing. They don't even know that they're fully doing it until you put it in their face, like, hey, you are crossing a boundary, or hey, and then they'll take a step back. Yes. Most of them I know, they'll take a step back and they'll be like, okay, you're right. You know what I'm saying? So, yes. Yeah.
And a lot of times some of that stuff just can't shift until, like with everything that we go through in life, a lot of that stuff can't really fully shift till we kind of get in there and look at where it came from and see what can be healed in there, which is literally probably my favorite thing about being a therapist.
Yeah. That aha moment.
Is the under, those deep motivations.
Okay. Got you. Okay. Let me ask you this. So you said you wanted to get into how to respond when your boundaries are crossed. How would a giver respond when a boundary is crossed, or what's the proper way? Like you was just saying, like you were real aggressive at first, and that's usually not the way you're supposed to be. Like, how do you respond?
Right. It's not, that is such, your questions are so great. I could I really just appreciate the types of questions you think of. They're awesome.
Thank you.
I think that, well, first of all, just somebody brand new at setting boundaries, please give yourself some grace and set them however you can. There is no shame in it. You can laugh later, like, oh my gosh, I didn't need to say F you to grandma. No, you didn't. But yay, you finally said no.
Right.
So in that beginning phase, let the pendulum just swing. You are going to screw this up, but guess what? You've already been screwing it up by not setting them. Right. So you'll find your sweet spot. So don't expect that there's going to be a lot of perfection. The ideal is, and remember, boundaries are moving, permeable things that flex according to the needs and the context. But the ideal thing is to speak, to set, and show your boundaries in ways that are respectful to yourself and to others. And that's kind of always my law, sort of the rule of thumb is, does this respect myself? Does this respect the other? There is no need, there's no justification for disrespecting another person. There just isn't. There's also no justification for disrespecting myself. So my boundaries can fit anywhere. That gives a wide range of possibilities for saying, for setting a boundary, because there's a lot of different ways to do that that are very respectful. And you're not respecting the other person's position or anything like that. It's just respecting their fellow humanity. Okay. So example might be, no, I'm really not comfortable with that, but thank you for asking. I mean, that's a no, but it's also, it's said respectfully. Now, sometimes boundaries do need to be set a lot firmer. And the way you know that is if you're with somebody who doesn't respect your boundaries.
Right, because I was about to say, what
just
happens
like
when you say that boundary and then it's like they don't understand that you're fully saying no, or they're thinking, well, I can wiggle around that no. Let me ask in another way.
Yes. Exactly. So we do this in the physical world all the time, right? If it's, depending on the situation, it's well, I'll give an example. I have this huge dog on my feet snoring while we're chatting. So depending on the situation, I might walk him freely. He just gets to run. It is Alaska. Hardly anyone lives here. So sometimes we actually get the beach to ourselves and he can just go to town. I may have a leash. So depending on the needs of the situation, I can adjust how firmly or relaxedly I'm going to set the boundaries. I may, depending on where I'm living at the moment, I may put up a fence around my property. I may put up a barbed wire fence around my property, depending on where I'm living, assuming I could. Or I might not have a fence at all, depending on where I'm living and the needs of the moment. So it's in the same way that is exactly how we can speak and set our boundaries. If somebody is really disrespectful of them, one of my favorites, and I don't remember who to credit for this, but it's somebody somewhere. It's called the broken record technique. It's fantastic. If you're with somebody who's wanting to question why you have a certain boundary and they want you to give the argument for why you just said no, prove it to me that, basically they're saying, prove it to me that you're allowed to even say no right now because I need this from you. You just say no. They're like, well, but I think you should because of such and such. Yeah, but I just said no. Well, but you should do it because of that. Nope. The answer for me is no. You just keep repeating the same thing over and over till they get tired. And again, you're not doing that to be rude. You're doing that just simply because it's a no, and you don't want to spend an hour arguing about why you have the right to say no. Sometimes a boundary is simply a very firm no in ending a relationship. If you're dating somebody and there's just a lot of boundary disrespect and there's not really any response to your complaints, that is setting a boundary. Breaking up is setting a boundary.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore.
Gotcha.
That's a very firm boundary, but that's sometimes really, really important.
It is. Let me ask you this. So a lot of people, as you know, will continue on with being the yes man because they don't want to lose a person, which that also goes back to childhood as well, what we spoke about before. What advice, not even how you would work with them, but what advice would you give to a woman or to a man like that who knows that, they're continuing a relationship because at the end of the day, they don't want to be alone?
Yeah. And boy, is that ever a thing. So first of all, I just tell that person, you're so not alone. And that's, a lot of times, that's 10-20% of why people even come into therapy.
Right.
It's a tough one. It's kind of that feeling of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know that the relationship is not good for you, or it's not working in a way that you hoped it would, but you love the person, or you love the dream of what you guys could be together, or there's kids, you have this, like, but this is how the family's supposed to be. You have these beautiful, wonderful hopes, but the reality is just so different. I think the really important thing to think about there is we get one life, at least that we know of. We get one life.
Right. And
so if you get to keep this person, but you are living in misery, is that really worth it? Is that really how you want to spend your remaining years? We don't know how long we get to be in this life. We forget about that sometimes. We forget about the preciousness of it, the luck of it. So if this is all you get, do you want to spend it in a state of depression, despair, a world where the colors are kind of gone? Yay, you have your person, but for what? What do you get out of that?
Do you think it's an ego thing where it's like your inner ego is, you're fighting for this relationship and your ego is, you're still in it, you know what I'm saying? Even though you're depressed, you're sad.
Right.
Do you think it's an ego thing that, like I said, when we go back to childhood, like the things that we've learned, like, do you think it's an ego plays a part in that?
I think it can, not for everybody, but I definitely think it can. And I know that's been an experience of mine too, is like, no, I will not let this fail.
Right.
I mean, at the time I wasn't thinking about it as ego, but it was more like, no, you think about in school, if I want to get a good grade on this, I'll get a good grade at this. If I do this, and by God, I'm going to do this relationship too.
Right.
Forgetting that relationships aren't like that.
That's something I had to learn because, in reality, if you work hard and you do the things you're supposed to do, then it's supposed to work. So I think sometimes we take that attitude in relationships, but at the end of the day, when you're working towards a goal, that's you working towards that goal, that's you working towards stuff in your life, versus a relationship, you are working with another person who may have different dreams, different motives, different paths. And that's something I had to learn and dissect.
Yes.
But
yes, preach. Yes.
That's why for me is the ego will do it.
Yes. Well, and you really got me. Tell me this may or may not apply to you.
Okay.
Yes. The other one for me that is huge, and that I see a lot in my work as well, and that I've definitely experienced myself, is it was, by the time the relationship ended, it wasn't, the grief was almost for the dream of what the relationship could be.
That is totally...
It had never happened. The dream had never, ever happened. It was
never
like
flourished.
Potential.
I did a podcast episode where I was speaking, it was just me talking, and I talked about my last dating situation and how I totally fell for this guy's potential, and I totally fell for the dream of what it could be and the potential that this guy had, and he just gave me those hard hit chemistry sparks that were like healthy and unhealthy at the same time. But in life, we were totally going two different directions, and I just held on to what it could be for a long time until kind of the inevitable happened with that particular situation. So yeah, I definitely I definitely can.
Yeah.
I definitely can relate, and that's something that a lot of people struggle with as well. Just the potential.
Yes, I think that the sometimes in therapy, I mean, what we do is just grieve the dream and let go of the dream because it was just a dream. It never actually happened.
Right.
And that's a boundary thing. Speaking of our topic, boundaries is, okay, this is what I want. And it takes some inward intelligence. This is what I want. This is what I'm hoping for. But this is what is actually happening. So the only thing I can actually count on is what is actually happening. Yes, there is a potential over here. It's gorgeous. There's also a potential it could go completely different direction. But the only thing I can actually count, we never think about that when we're lost in fantasy, which I think is partly just that cocktail of hormones when it's a good chemistry click.
Right.
Kind of makes it really tough to think of anything negative. But it's good boundaries are, this is what is happening now. Am I happy with this? Can I do this? This is what I want. This is what is actually happening. And again, those boundaries are learned in the school of life by not getting them, as you said, and then, this is what happened to me here. I fell for a potential. Right. The potential was awesome. I was dating this great potential, but not actually a human that I really clicked well with.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. And so many people, that's really what a lot of people are going through right now. And I'm so glad you decided to talk about setting boundaries and what does that look like and what does it mean? And then us kind of even digging into this topic of potential, because that's what a lot of us fall for, that men and women both. We fall for the potential of what a relationship, a person could be. And we don't look at reality because we're too busy looking at what we've kind of created in our own heads in a way, because a person could get in conversation of what they want to be or go ahead.
Yes, I'm totally following you. I agree.
Oh, yeah, we create stories in a way, like we probably can get bits and pieces in reality, but at the end of the day, when we create potential, we're kind of creating what we want. So, I think that's just something a lot of people need to learn from. Not everybody, but a lot of people in general. So tell me, what projects do you have, or tell us about your business. Tell us where people can find you, all of that good stuff.
Well, I have a little private practice. I love it. It's called Wild Goose Counseling. There's a Facebook page for it. It was originally actually supposed to be like an advertisement Facebook page for just my local area, but it ended up becoming like a fun side hobby. There's so many therapists out there who create such cool content. Right. So it's so that's available on Facebook if somebody wants to look for it. But I this year, kind of because of COVID, I ended up building an addition onto my house, and I now have a home-based practice, which is so much fun.
This is awesome.
So instead of, it's kind of inspired by having to do telehealth while paying, all this rent for this apartment or for this office that I wasn't even using because we're doing telehealth for everything. And I just thought, why not? That's been really fun to be able to just kind of keep everything centered at home.
That is awesome. Okay, Molly. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me. This is fun.
Awesome. I had a really good time too. And you guys can find me at P4K Podcast on Instagram and on Facebook. And until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to today's show. If you liked this podcast, please download and subscribe. If there's anything you would like to talk about in regards to relationships, or would like to be a guest on the show to speak on relationships or get advice, you can always connect via social media at Playing for Keeps, or email DJ at info@p4kdating.com. Thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.